Good evening, y'all. How you doing? I'm hanging in. Been a rough day. Gonna get even rougher. 7 years ago at this moment, I was finishing up giving my dad his bedtime medicines through his feeding tube, getting him comfortable, putting on the TV to the channel he wanted to watch. It was a Thursday night, so wrestling was on, and he was watching that. His kitty Socks was laying beside him, and not long from now on that night, I would be going from the room I'm in now to the living room. I had been contacted earlier that day by one of my teachers because I was full-time in college, and she had told me I had missed some very important work. So after getting Daddy settled, I went out there and got on my tablet and started completing my work and getting it submitted. I think by the time I was done, it was pretty close to midnight. I wasn't tired yet, so as soon as I finished my work, I got online to meet up with my boyfriend and spend time with him online. Up until recently, only 3 people ever knew about it, about the fact that I was quote unquote dating somebody online, somebody that also lived in England. But because my marriage had turned into a total shit show and I was living in hell, I grabbed the first chance of some happiness that I could. It was wrong, but it happened. So I spent some time with him online. I think, well, after I got done with my schoolwork, I looked in on Dad. He was snoring as usual, so I closed the door and went back in and got online. And about 2 o'clock, maybe 2:30, I put my tablet up, looked in on Dad one last time, and I went out into the recliner and settled down to go to sleep. Earlier that day, the home health nurse had come and put a wound vac on his bed sore that he had from the neglect he suffered at the hands of Avante of Roanoke. It was right above his butt, as big as my fist, and down to the bone almost. Because early on in his paralysis, he ended up with a brachial blood clot. He had also been on blood thinners, and 2 days before, they had done blood work on him and found that his blood was too thin. So I had been told to cut off his blood thinner, and I did. So when the nurse came, she put the wound back on, showed me how to monitor it, how to change the container once it sounded an alarm that it was full, everything. So when I finally went to sleep, because he was asleep, I looked in again. He was snoring. I didn't come in and check on him or anything. I just visually did a check that everything was okay. And I went to sleep. I was awakened at 6 o'clock that morning by a noise. At first I thought it was the wound vac making the alarm that the container was full and needed to be changed. So I got up and came in, but it wasn't the wound vac. It was my father gasping in the last moments of his life. My dad had signed a DNR, do not resuscitate. But I was a cop and had been through training, and when I walked in, I didn't even think, I just did. And I got his bed flat and started CPR. I got him breathing again. But after I had gotten his bed flat and took the covers down, that's when I saw he was laying in a pool of blood. For some reason, the wound vac did not alarm because it wasn't attached properly. When you attach a wound vac around a wound, you have, like they do when you have an IV, it is the plastic with adhesive. And the wound vac was supposed to alarm if the contact was broken. And unbeknownst to me, during the night, he had slowly been bleeding out around the wound vac. I know, Lovey, it's okay. So I gave him CPR, And he started breathing very shallow, but he was breathing. And I called 911 and my husband. My husband got down here first, and we did what we could to keep my dad calm, to reassure him. And then the rescue squad got here and came in and started working on him. Those men, and I believe there was a woman, I don't remember. They were amazing. They worked on my father for over an hour to get him as stable as they could to move him. Lovey, it's okay. So, once they finally got him stable enough, they got him into the ambulance. And off we all went to the hospital. It's about a 20 to 25 mile journey from our house to there. Of course, we didn't go as fast as the ambulance did, so they got there first, but we got there quite soon after. But before we turned up to the hospital, I looked at my husband and I told him, Dad's gone. My husband could be a very unemotional person, and he was very unsympathetic at times. So when I would be emotional, he would be impatient and demanding and tell me to stop being so emotional and pull myself together. And he kind of did that when I told him Dad was gone. He's like, no, he's not. You're just imagining things. So we pulled in behind the ambulance, and they were starting to get him out, and I looked at them and I said, let me see him. I want to give him a kiss and tell him I love him. And they refused. And I knew then he was gone. I knew it without any doubt. He was already gone. So they took him in to the emergency room. We went into the waiting room. It wasn't long before they called us back. And as we went through the door, there was a small area to the left that had some chairs, and they asked us to sit there. And the doctor came. He looked at me, and I told him, I said, he's gone, isn't he? And the doctor was like, yes, I'm sorry, but he is gone. He lost too much blood and his heart stopped beating, and we could not resuscitate. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it was true. So they had us sit there for a few while they cleaned Dad up and kind of prepared him. And then they let us go back to say goodbye. And he was so cold. I never knew a person could be that cold. My life shattered that day. And that day is tomorrow, 7 years ago. My entire world shattered. And I was already blaming myself for his fall. That I should have found him sooner, that I should have known he was in trouble. And when he died, because he was in my care, my guilt became 1,000 times worse. I blamed myself once again, and I spiraled into a deep, dark hole of self-hatred and self-loathing and shame for my failure. And I stayed in that downward spiral for 6 years. I don't blame myself anymore. I said this all yesterday, I know. But I really don't blame myself, but I still miss him. After I saw his body, of course they asked which funeral home he was to go to. And of course that's one thing my dad and I had talked about, so I let them know. And I got on the phone. First I called my brother. He was as stunned as I was. And he started doing what he had to come out. I called my aunt, my dad's sister. She was shocked as well, but she didn't bother to come up. I called my youngest son. My oldest son was on deployment on a submarine. And I couldn't reach him. So I got hold of my son's dad, seeing as he was ex-military and also lived at the beach with them. And he was able to reach my oldest. And I knew they would not let my son come home for the funeral. I knew that unless it's your direct parent, it just doesn't happen. And I knew that. So, but his command did let him use their sat phone, I believe, to call me. And he let me know that as soon as he got back in port, that he would be taking the leave to come out. And after talking to my immediate family, I started letting the other people that were close to Dad, I let them know he was gone. And I know it was the shock of hearing that he was dead that people found incredulous. But I'd tell them, and they're, because they had either talked to him or seen him in the past couple days, I would call and tell them he was dead, and they're like, "You're kidding." And at the time, that offended me every time, because I'm sitting there thinking, who in their fucking right mind would joke that their father just died? But I understand their reaction more now, because they had just talked to him and he was getting better. So to hear that he had died was unbelievable. But that's what reality was. And then later that day, of course, I had to go to the funeral home to start picking out everything that was needed. When I got done picking out the casket and everything, I went to the florist we always use to pick out flowers, to let them know everything, the date that he would be buried, and what we wanted, if people wanted to send their condolences through flowers, all of that. And then my memory of the next week is very, very faint. I remember the viewing, and I remember that so clearly because at every chance I could, I went and hid. Because I couldn't take everybody hugging me and telling me about my dad and how much they'll miss him. Because at the time, all I could think was, none of you showed 1 ounce of care in the 6 months since he fell. And now you're telling me how much he meant to you. Where were you when he needed people? That was the only thing I kept thinking. You all are grieving for him, but where were you when he was here and needed something? And it made me so bitter. I was so bitter, but I told myself time and again that I hadn't changed, that I was still the same person, that I wasn't hurt, I wasn't angry, that I didn't treat people any differently. But looking back, I did. My ex-husband, I treated him horribly. Every bit of my hate, self-hatred, and loathing I took out on him. And he thought I hated him, when in fact I didn't hate him, I hated myself. But I did. I treated people horribly because I was so stuck in grief. I don't remember much of the funeral. The only part I clearly remember is the 7-gun salute. 21-gun salute because he was Navy and we did Navy burial. And every time those guns sounded, I jumped. And I still hear them ringing at times. Every time I've seen something on TV where there's been a funeral with either the bagpipes or the gun salute, I've never been able to sit and watch it. I've had to fast forward because it immediately would take me to that time, to that night, that day that he died and was buried. It's not good being stuck in the trauma and as much as I'm sitting here now crying and living it, I'm in a much better headspace, and I know that I can cry. I can miss him, but I can do those things without blaming myself. I can finally fully grieve without the shame. I miss him terribly. But I am trying to get my life together. I'm trying to live again. I think I'm done for the night. I need to take my bedtime medicines, turn out the light, try to sleep. I'm not sure if I'll be able to sleep tonight, but I will try very hard to. If you've watched this, I thank you. I hope I haven't traumatized you too much. But please don't feel sorry for me. That's not what I want. I hope y'all have a good night. And I love y'all from the bottom of my heart. Good night.